Namaste and good morning. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi. Welcome you to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. We are here for a special lecture on Building a Planet-Friendly Economy by Dr. R. Balasubramaniam. The lecture is organized by Center for Environment. Sorry, was my voice? Yeah, sorry. Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at IMPRI and India Water Portal. I would now like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Simi Mehta, who is CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. Ma'am, over to you. Thank you.
A very good morning to everyone. Thank you, Ritika, for leading us into the program today. This discussion series called the State of the Environment #Planet Talks is specifically curated to serve as a platform for interdisciplinary exchange of ideas and to foster the convergence of natural and social sciences in order to generate greater awareness and produce knowledge on the environment of the past, present, and future, with an eye on sustainable development. We are all living testimonies to the consumption-led paradigm on which the current economic model is thriving. In this process, the concepts like community, equity, fairness, and justice find themselves relegated to a marginalized space. All participants in the economy work on the principle of profit maximization, and they have little patience and time for exploring options of making it more compassionate or soulful. So what needs to be done? Would a new narrative and discourse lead us into impactful ways of creating a real and sustainable impact? What lessons does the ongoing pandemic impart on the ways in which the planet and other living creatures on it are dependent? How can we ensure that there is a symbiotic and not selfish relationship between human beings with the rest of the ecosystem? To delve into these important questions and also on how to create an economic model that is both practical and sustainable, along with leadership that is required to create it across the private, public, civil society actors and beyond, we have with us a very special guest, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Balu to you. Dr. R. Balasubramaniam is widely respected development activist, leadership trainer, thinker, and writer. He embodies a rare blend of grassroots and macro perspectives and policy through his multifaceted experience of more than 3 decades of working among the remote forest-based tribal communities in the southern Indian district of Mysuru. After his MBBS, he earned his MPhil in hospital administration and health systems management at BITS Pilani. He has a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard University. His living habits have been greatly influenced by the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, and at the young age of 19, he founded the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement based on the principles of Ahimsa, Satya, Seva, and Tyag. Dr. Balu is also the founder and chairman of Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, or GRAM, a public policy think tank in India. Dr. Balu is a Tata scholar, a Mason Fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School, and a fellow at the Hauser Center for Civil Society at Harvard University. He is currently a visiting professor at Cornell University, USA, and also at IIT Delhi, where he teaches leadership and human development. He is also a visiting faculty at KLE Technological University, Hubli, and also at the Kautilya School of Public Policy, Hyderabad. Twice he was the head and visiting professor of the Vivekananda Chair of the University of Mysore. Professor Balu has traveled widely within and outside the country promoting the concept of participatory sustainable development, which is contextually relevant and culturally appropriate. He coaches and mentors and runs leadership workshops for senior leaders in the nonprofit, corporate, government, and educational sectors globally. He is also a member of the technical group set up by SEBI for setting up of the social stock exchange in India. Dr. Balu has authored 7 books and writes extensively about Swami Vivekananda and on development issues in local Kannada and English newspapers, and in his blog, rbalu.com. His books, I, the Citizen, Voices from the Grassroots, and Leadership Lessons for Daily Living have been globally acclaimed. Sir, we are fortunate to have you amidst us this morning. I invite you to begin your lecture. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Simi. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to share some thoughts on a subject that's not just dear to me, but I think it's going to be priceless for the world itself. The way the world is emerging and the way COVID has reminded us of our vulnerabilities, COVID has reminded us of our inadequacies, COVID has reminded us of how little science and technology can do or cannot do, how much it can do, as well as how little it can do in all different spaces. I think it's been a fascinating last 1 year. I believe from the perspective of what I'm going to speak, it's also been a very powerful reminder, a powerful opportunity for us to look at ourselves and sort of think of how do we reboot, how do we recalibrate. I was thinking of sharing some thoughts. I was drawn back to a very small incident that took place just before COVID happened. Most of my life's work has been with indigenous people living in or abutting the forest. And this particular story relates to an elderly woman, maybe in her early 60s, whose husband is no longer alive, but who's very passionate about standing on her own feet, cultivating her own land. Bommi is a Kadukurba tribal woman whose entire existence has been a sort of a story has been enmeshed with that story of the forest around her. And she has to live with the wildlife. It's a Project Tiger area, it's a Project Elephant area, all the challenges that possibly people living around the forest have to actually face. She has had to live through the threat of being dislocated and actually being dislocated twice when a major reservoir was built in her area, when all the forest that she loved and lived in was declared a national park. So having been subjected to so-called development, that the narrative of development and what Pandit Nehru called the temples of modern India actually was for her a doomsday message. And suffering through that calamities and then looking at a little 2 acre of land that the government gave her as compensation, she and her husband were living on that land. And several years ago, the husband passed away and she didn't give up. She said, I'm going to continue the agriculture that he was doing. I say all this because I've known Bommi for the last 30 years now, a little more than that, from a young woman to what she is today. And after we had given her some specialized variety of seeds, and she had used the seeds, and I was invited by our agriculture team to come and see how well the harvest was. It's all looking so beautiful, and it's always nice to see a crop in full harvest waiting to just be cut and threshed. And then COVID had not struck us. It's around January of, I think, last year, and things were we are hearing about something happening in China. In February, when I visited her, hoping to see her crop would be threshed and she would have bagfuls of ragi for her, she was in a very pitiable state because COVID had already stuck. Big bundles of hay and ragi mixed together. And so I was asking her, what is she going to do about it? And I was concerned about her and her family. And surprisingly, Bommi was as much concerned about herself and her family, as much as concerned about her neighbors and all the several people, her relatives, who would come and help her thresh the crop. And she was trying to tell me, you know what, all my relatives, my children, everybody would join hands and we would all separate the hay from the ragi, and then the ragi would be packed into bags, and everything was done. I would give them ragi. And these are all landless relatives of ours. She would say that they would work. And in her own way, she said, the pala, the benefit of their working for me to clean up the ragi and put it all in bags would mean I would gift them bags of ragi. And this year, because they're not able to participate with me because the government has said social distancing, we can't get together. And see, when we use these words, we don't recognize the impact it can have on rural communities and tribal communities. In a house with 8 rooms, you can practice isolation, quarantine, social distancing, everything you can talk of. Incomes that each of us in urban India have, we can buy liters of sanitizers and soaps every day. But imagine a family living in a 10 by 10 room, 6 of them, and you want them to practice social distancing. And Bhumi was here talking about not about the challenge she was facing, but about the loss of benefit that she could have given to her family members and to her relatives and to her neighbors, those who did not have the land to grow the ragi that she had grown in her land in. I start off with the story because of two reasons. One, embedded in the story is the indigenous way of thinking, a priceless treasure that society, not just this country, is losing around the world. Embedded in their DNA was a context of stakeholding, was a context and the concept of sharing benefits in a communal way, appropriate to the effort that you put into the mechanism of generating those benefits. But look at what we have done. Look at how last year has shaped for all of us. And if you look at this recent Oxfam report that they released in the World Economic Forum, and figures which all of you might be aware, just see what happened in those 9 to 10 months. 1,000 billionaires, to take the top 1,000 billionaires of the world, they possibly have come back to their pre-COVID levels within 9 months of the COVID crisis being announced in last January or February. So essentially by the end of the year, they're already back to their pre-COVID levels. In fact, if I remember, Elon Musk and possibly the Jeff Bezos together, I think generated $67 billion, an unthinkable sum for the rest of the world, just two people. I have nothing against them or against all the 1,000 billionaires, but I'm just trying to make a point, which I'll possibly expand a little later. But look at, if 1,000 billionaires in this world can recover and come back to the pre-COVID levels of maintaining their billions within 9 months of the COVID crisis, has it really hit them? Is it as bad as what we imagine it to be? The problem comes when you look at the other end of the spectrum, where if you look at the world's poorest, they will now need a decade to go back to the pre-COVID levels. The next 10 years and how the economy is going to be supported or shaped or redistributed in various mechanisms is going to determine whether the world's poorest can actually reach pre-COVID levels. It's going to take them 10 long years. Look at how much we have set back in our fight against poverty. Well, we are very carefully crafting the struggle to make people prosperous, and very few people more prosperous than what others are. The fight against poverty is something we need to keep in mind. So can we really do something about it? Something I want all of you to focus on. So the 10 richest people in the world as of today, right now, can actually make sure that no single human being, about a little more than 7 billion people that we have today, will slip back into poverty. You know, we know in India itself, NFHS surveys tell us that close to 67 to 70% of people who just get out of poverty slip back into poverty levels with just one episode of a health problem in their family, in themselves or in their family. But these 10 people in this world, together between them, can make sure that no individual around the world, not just India, can slip back into poverty. Not only that, at a time when nations are struggling to find the money for vaccination, these just 10 people together can pay for COVID vaccines for every single human being in this world. Just imagine the kind of wealth that I'm talking about on one side. India itself during this crisis added 17 billion years. When we say when economy is going down, sometimes I wonder, lockdown, all the so-called mainstream economic activities going receding, but how does 17 people become billionaires? What is their magic formula that all of us need to learn? Even today, 1% of India controls 73% of India's wealth. During the same time, the poorest 67 crore Indians, they could only move the needle, to 1% income growth that they could think of. That's a challenge that we are having. Many of them in India, the surprising fact is, even today, 37% of the so-called billionaires that we have in India inherited wealth. So it's not as though they are all struggled and become great entrepreneurs and generated wealth out of the creative, innovative abilities alone, but they just had a great takeoff point, a ladder which they had already climbed, and then climbing the next floor is no big deal, but climbing the first few rungs of the ladder, which is what we got to worry about, and look at what kind of an economy can shape that. This is on one side of all the inequities that I'm talking about. But let's look at the last decade. Let's look at the last century itself. Post-industrial revolution, when economies simply grew, outstripped the way that the world could actually contribute in terms of resources to generate and sustain these economies. Just look at what we have done to ourselves as human beings. Three major crises, if we can bucket them into three crises. I think that we are facing three major crises. Humanity has never faced this kind of crisis. COVID is just a representation of the crisis. It's just a sort of a flashpoint. What we don't recognize is COVID by itself is not the crisis. COVID is telling us a story of a deeper volcano that is going to emerge if we don't do something about this. The first crisis, I would say, is an unprecedented ecological crisis. And that's why we're talking about a planet-friendly economy. We are not talking about not building an economy. Economic growth is as essential as human existence today. We all need to have our food, our clothes, our homes, and the little vehicles to travel in, and the planes to fly around. And all this is necessary. I'm not even critiquing the economic model, saying that all that has to be shut down and we have to live like 100,000 years ago. Well, I'm as much ideological as practical in my approach. I'm just looking at what have we done to ourselves, and are there any practical options that we can all generate to re-alter the situation. Look at the ecological crisis that we have created. We are consuming more than 50% extra resources than what the earth can offer us today. You cannot even imagine the crisis that we have created. Right now in Mysore, the last 10 days, the temperature is 38 degrees Celsius, which is, I have lived here for most of my adult life, and I have never really experienced temperatures like that in the month of February. Now, I visited in early February to Delhi, expecting it to be cold. I packed a sweater, and I'm sure Simi will agree with me. It wasn't even cold. It's actually pleasant, and maybe now it's hot. I wouldn't even call it warm anymore. So things have altered. And 3 weeks ago, in one particular small suburb of Karnataka, it poured hailstones the size of small rocks. You want to see pictures that were sent to me by my friend. I couldn't believe it, and they actually sent me videos and pictures, and I know that it's true. And they just never experienced that. Nobody can remember that kind of a rain, hailstones especially, for long periods of time. They couldn't even remember all that. So something is altering. Climate change, these issues are not just slogans of scientists to scare us. These are experiences where each one of us are going through every day. It's as though it's inseparable to our lifestyles now. And that is a challenge. Right? The ecological crisis is something unbelievably real. Look at the next crisis, which I already spoke about, the crisis of inequity that we have created for ourselves. We have created and fashioned an economic model where the rich can get richer very fast, and the poor can get poor also very fast. The struggles that the poor have to make, even move the needle a little bit in the economic growth, in the social growth, is a far cry considering the present circumstances. So the real crisis, but more importantly, the current economic model that we need to keep in mind has created a growth story where we celebrate entrepreneurs. I got nothing against entrepreneurs. I myself run workshops for entrepreneurs. Because if you don't educate them when they're becoming an entrepreneur about the soulful, compassionate nature of capitalism that they need to belong to, we're not going to change the world. So I invest a lot of my time and energy working with very young people who want to get into this space. But just look at the kind of situations we have today. What very few people realize is, even in countries like India, where a demographic dividend is celebrated, what is it actually that we're talking about? We're talking about 8% growth. India is going to be the fastest growing economy again this year. We talk about it as though it's a great attainment. It is a great attainment. I don't belittle it. But is that the right way to grow? The moment we qualify and ask ourselves, is this the best way to grow? And how much of this growth is going to benefit how many people? What are the per capita participation is creating a wealth that we're generating? Then the answers are a little challenging for all of us. So we need to ask ourselves these questions and say, is a $5 trillion economy the only story that we need to have? Or a $5 trillion economy shared by 1.3 billion people in a pragmatically beneficial way where each one gets what he deserves, not because of some act of charity or generosity or a subsidy thrown up by the government, but is there some other mechanism? I just want you all to bear with me for a few minutes till I come to the actual practicalization of how we can approach this problem. So my way of looking at it is being that this consumerist race that we have created for ourselves, and I can challenge each one of you. Many of us are now belong to the age where we've all been using cell phones for at least 15, 20 years already. And look at every time you change your cell phone, did you actually change it because the phone stopped working and it was worthless or useless? How many of us do that? How many of us change it because the next new model is that much more exciting, that much more feature-rich, and that much more different? How many of us change our cars because it actually stopped moving or became so polluting that you shouldn't be driving it around? Or we change it because a fresh new model came into the market and you were thrilled to have it, and your neighbor has the new model and you want to have the newest model to show off. Ask yourself these questions. How many sets of clothing each one of us buy every year? On an average, I think in India, studies show that each of us buy between 6 to 9 pairs of new clothes every year. And we have never really asked ourselves, are these questions even relevant to us? In the kind of talk that I'm talking about, a planet-friendly economy, does it even matter? What can I do? The problem is so huge. What can I contribute towards the mitigation of climate change? What can I contribute towards making sure that inequities come down? I know it's a long battle, but how do we start? What is it that we have to talk about? So in short, the economic model that we have crafted, this constant growth expansion model, is driven by one single principle called profit maximization. And all of us have to blame for this. No single system can be held accountable for this problem. All of us in our own ways. The more I consume, the more I promote consumerism. The more I consume, the more people actually participate to create more products for me to consume. The more I consume, the government gets more taxes to be used and played around with. And so they facilitate more and more consumption that they have to create. So we need to stimulate the economy, means stimulating consumption. That's what the bottom line today is. But there's also a silver lining that is arising around the world. I'm privileged to be part of a group of people who are around the world looking at how do we actually look at shifting this narrative. Can we in our own small way shift the narrative to a point where we can start making a difference? Is it even practical to talk about it? Can we talk to an young man of 21, 22 and say, well, your role model is not becoming the next Bill Gates of the world, but can you become a different kind of a Bill Gates of the world? Would you even find it appealing? Because this is the reality we are all dealing with, right? Because we have created a fashion and education system which talks about maximizing your abilities to generate the highest possible wealth. So we are all revolving around profit maximization as our motive. So when you grow up in a generation of people where you think that success and the narrative of success is driven by how much you maximize, how well you maximize, how quickly you maximize, the narrative of how many resources you're consuming to maximize becomes a side story. It just becomes somewhere out there, but things are changing. Today, more and more young people are refusing to participate in the growth narrative that has virtually destroyed their childhoods as they were growing up. Today, I think the silver lining, and I meet at least a couple of 100,000 young people around the world today. I'm fortunate to be energized by the kind of vibrations these people bring to the conversation. They're as concerned about climate change as they are about their own family issues. So the good thing is they're as concerned about society. I'm not saying everybody is, but at least maybe a self-selected group of people I meet are all part of the narrative. Governments are rethinking. So the COVID crisis has woken up a lot of challenges, right? Whether it's corporate leaders. Let's look at in India itself, several corporate leaders making mainstream automotives moved into making masks and ventilators. People adapted, people became resilient, people changed attitudes. I know one company making two-wheelers are actually making masks and face shields and giving it possibly at very low cost around the world. So people have realized that if you don't have people to buy my products, my company is going to shut down. We can even call it as personalized selfish selflessness, whatever you want to call it. But I think we got to go deeper and build on this narrative and say, how does the economy get created? Where did it all begin? Where did these growth stories begin? The primary beginning of this growth story was, when governments evolved and shaped itself. Public sectors was the big story, right? Even in our own country, if you look at the 50s, our founding fathers of this country invested so heavily on public sector enterprises. Today, we're actually trying to dispose them of. But these were the enterprises that actually created India's fight against poverty. And it was necessary. There was a generation of people who needed public sector intervention. So government was the primary catalyst and continues to be the primary catalyst of development. I strongly believe, though I come from the civil society sector, I strongly believe, but for the public sector, the COVID crisis in this country would have been unmanageable. It's a tribute to our public health systems that today we are still where we are today. Just look at Brazil, look at the United States, look at all the modern economies of Europe. They're all crumbling today because of the pressure of a public challenge like COVID. But look at India. Our preparedness, maybe our own preparedness with facing crisis after crisis, has made us so well prepared that we can manage many of these crises today. Well, on the lighter side of it can be that, but the point is we have a robust public health system. And this time, the private systems also participated. It's not as though they were simply out of the battle. The public system might have paid for it, the government might have paid it, but the private systems participated. Even in the vaccination drive today, if you look at it, private systems are participating and they're compensated. The vaccine comes free from government, people pay 250 rupees. So the private sector is not doing it free, but at least they're giving the space and the people to participate in a massive national campaign. So I believe the public sector has evolved, though it started off as a primary mover of the economy. Over time, around the world, they're participating less and less in social sector interventions. Even our own budgets have been succeedingly coming less, except for this year's budget, which has heavily invested. And the good news from people like me is, though the words, they didn't use the exact words that I would love them to have used, is the finance minister actually said, we're going to reinvigorate creation of human capital in this country. And I think that is a very critical statement, which unfortunately very few analysts around the world have picked up. But to me, it is music to my ears in a sense. Now let's look at where I'm going. The public sector has also evolved to understanding that it is no longer efficient. It is no longer capable of meeting all the complex demands of a growing youthful economy. And so it's also recognizing that its inefficiency is pulling it down, it is disposing of its own entities, it is moving away. So you are creating a system where public sector is becoming less public in a sense and opening up to privatization, whether it is Ayushman Bharat paying for private hospitals for healthcare and sort of abdicating some of the public sector roles, which is, in my view, as an activist, it is not very good, but that's a reality around the world. Public sector is moving away and looking at and our Prime Minister's favorite quote of less government, more governance is becoming a very favorite quote of a lot of our leaders around the world, and maybe a necessary quote in my view. But let's look at private sectors. Private sectors also are slowly waking up to the fact that their business and markets are no longer being determined by the pricing alone. People are willing to pay the extra dollar or extra couple of dollars if they know where the product is coming from. So fair trade practices, or things like it's planet-friendly products, or things like no child labor free. They're all becoming not just slogans, but demands of a new growing generation, which is very keen on fulfilling its social obligations, even in the purchases that they're doing. One example I quote. Several years ago, I was listening to a lecture during my teaching semester at Cornell. Paulman, the then head of Unilever, was addressing all the students, and he was talking about how Unilever has now no choice but to move towards a sustainable economic model. And he gave this fascinating example. He said a lot of young people decided to boycott Unilever products, whether the moisturizers and creams and all that, in the US especially. I'm not too sure that movement caught up in India, because I didn't read anything like that here. And these young women and men, they decided that they would boycott their products based on the fact that they were using plastic microbeads. And these plastic microbeads, when you wash your face after using those beautifying agents or whatever you call them, the creams, etc., were actually getting washed into the seabed and then finally going to the sea. So just what we don't see, we never realize, is when we use those creams and products and after we wash them off, we are dumping thousands of tons of plasticized microbeads into the ocean. And they get into the marine life. And marine life, we don't even worry about it unless when you want to eat them and we suffer from mercury poison by eating fishes, then we think of, oh, mercury is in the fish. Or when we get plastics in the fish and they're dying and we don't have enough fish, we worry about them. But we got to change the narrative. And these women said, we're not going to use your products. There's so much of market pressure on Unilever. They actually invested millions of dollars in R&D to make sure they moved away from plasticized microbeads to different kinds of agents that they could use, which is very friendly and organic and all that stuff. Today, they got back into the market in a big way, and their buyers and their people benefiting from this is all still growing again. So he was giving this example how markets are determining our behavior. It's not just profits. So I think there's this movement of corporates from profit maximization towards being planet sensitive. I'm not saying they're completely planet friendly, not everybody, it's a movement. As much as NGOs are now recognizing, we were all dependent on donations earlier. I remember 37 years ago when I started the Vivekananda youth movement, I would look for people to write checks. Now 44% of our revenues come from user-generated revenues. We realize that we can't be philanthropic all the time. We have to be no loss, no profit kind of operation model in different projects. We got communities to participate. We're saying people should as you become richer, you start paying for your services that we're giving you. So the model is moving, and NGOs are not completely charitable anymore. They have to, otherwise they're not going to survive. So the DNA of all these organizations are altering. And this is where I would like to propose a new economic model that many of us call the fourth sector economy. The fourth sector economy is very simple in its sense. It's soulful, it's compassionate, it's filled and driven by the principle of benefit optimization. We believe every participant in this economic food chain is a person who's contributing and therefore deserves a benefit proportional to his contribution. Which means if I'm going to work 8 hours a day, it is not just the duration of my work, but my intensity and the non-replaceability of my contribution should decide my benefit that I get out of it. I become a stakeholder participant in this economy and not just a shareholder the corporates have to worry about. So in a sense, there's a very, very important pressure on me as an individual to start looking around, participating in an economic model which is driven by stakeholdership, which is driven by benefit optimization and driven by a democratization of ownership. A lot of new things that are coming in. And these things can be done. We have in fact evolved policies which nations can actually prescribe and follow. In fact, the Californian government is already thinking about moving into a fourth sector economic model. And I'm sure the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world as a state, or the largest economy of the US, if they start moving towards it, many of us will imitate it. California has always been a pioneer and forerunner in a lot of social changes, and something like that happens. A lot of corporates are moving towards it. In India itself, we had 1 or 2 large corporates who subscribed to this model and said, I'm going to be a forerunner of this change and try to make my companies participate in the fourth sector model. We had surveys done of MBA students around the world, and especially in the United States, where we have a lot of data. Close to 80–86% of them mentioned that one of the reasons why they would choose to work in a company is not the pay package. Maybe India is in the curve where people look at pay packages. There they said pay package is an important consideration, but not the only important consideration. Not just the only consideration. They said not the only important consideration. Considerations like do I even want to be working in that company based on whether they are soulful, whether they're really concerned about the planet, what are the contributions to destroying the economy, what are the contributions to mitigating the economy, what are the contributions to positively contributing to the earth. So these kind of things that they're going to be talking about. And they said that is going to be a critical decision maker for them. So what we need today in these 3 sectors is borrow the DNA of the 3 good things of the sectors. Public sectors, public accountability, public responsibility, public obligation. And the private sector's efficiency and the concept, the very fact that you have to sustain economies by generating profits, but generating it in a very beneficial way to everybody who's participating in the economic change. The NGO sectors, civil society obligations, and the way the social outlooks. So combine the DNA of all the 3 and bring in a new narrative and economic model, which looks at the primacy is social intent, the primacy is a planet-friendly world, but it doesn't sacrifice making profits. So it's not about giving up profits, but making profits in a way which is fair, just, ethical, and distributes the profits reasonably based on the contributions of what each person brings to the table. You know, if you look at comparisons about the CEO salary and the janitor's salary in an office, it's enormously humongous, especially in countries like India. Let all the janitors of this country working in corporate stop working for 3 days continuously. You can't enter the corporate premises. How many CEOs will even know how to hold a broom and clean up the campuses? So it looks very simple and we take it for granted. But can't we understand that there is a benefit in that particular category of people playing that role? So recognizing that we all play different roles in the economic food chain, and each role has to be compensated reasonably based on what we bring to the table and how valuable each one of us are. COVID has raised one fundamentally different questions. What role is important? What role is relevant? The way we treated our migrants, most of them being construction workers. The construction economy is the largest booster of the economy. It's the biggest stimulator of the economy. And if that stops, the country will nearly stop. Just imagine if all the migrants are not taken. It's in the welfare of the builders to take care of the migrant laborers, not as migrants, but as active participants in the economy that they are creating. If we can reward them with the benefits that they bring to the benefits in proportion to the value that they bring. So the context is going to be value that each one brings, proportional to which benefits are received. So when you move into this economic model, planet is saved because the benefit the planet gets. Planet is a critical stakeholder. The individual is a critical stakeholder. The corporate entity is a critical stakeholder. If each one of us as an individual, the 4th major component, like I would like to really stress on, decides to shift the narrative. Like those young women in the United States said, we will not use a cream with plasticized beads in them. If you and I decide today, I will not be a participant in this consumerist economy, which is ruining the planet, then market will change. Market forces are known to change based on pressures built by consumers. If you and I decide, I will not invest in a company, I will not buy shares of a company which I think is only looking at profit maximization. If you and I become responsible shareholders and move towards stakeholding and say dividends alone is not what I want, but reasonable fair dividends along with benefit optimization is what I'm going to seek, companies will start shifting their attention. A lot of companies I work with and advise in India are already moving in this direction. That's hope. I'm an eternal optimist in a sense, and I believe that this shift will happen. Maybe it will take us 50 years. Maybe you only have 10 years more to do it in, but we have to begin somewhere. Last, I would like to end my call by saying all this change needs leadership. Leadership at every level. We need extraordinary national level leadership. A leadership which is not driven just by populist electoral concerns. A leadership that is not crafting its development narrative based on crony capitalism or by how the corporate world can capture policy making, not succumbing to the elite capture that we see around the world today, but looking at something where their courage to redefine public good itself and playing the role of responsible parent, shepherding this entire process, because they are the ones who set the policies. We need leadership in corporate world where corporate CEOs will have the courage to say that I'm going to be entrepreneurial in the way I'm going to drive this compassionate capitalist model, where they're not going to be driven by just shareholder pressures, by understanding what needs to be done and doing it courageously. It needs to be crafted by great leadership in the NGO sector, where they are willing to actually play the bridge between communities and educate them about how they can be unwitting participants in the economy, which is actually destroying our own lives. We then have to move to and all this cannot happen if you and I don't change. If you want to craft this economic model, don't sit at home and say it's too big for me to handle. The government will do it. All these major corporates will do it. Nobody is going to do it if I don't begin with myself. Can you relook at all the things that we have done, whether it's simple vegetarianism? It looks, I'm not against non-veg or meat, but the amount of consumption of energy that we are taking away for generating meat for human beings today is nothing compared to the kind of energy that goes into producing plant-based alternatives. Even making simple choices like that, making choices that I only need 2 sets of clothing or 3 sets of clothing that I need to buy every year. And I don't have to buy that 6 extra sets. Just that one pair of jeans, my friends, needs 8,000 liters of water to actually craft and create. If you and I take a call and say, I will not buy the second pair of jeans, because that's going to be 8,000 more liters of water. If you and I decide to stop the dripping tap and make sure that that stops dripping. If you and I remember to switch off that light when we think we don't need to have that light. If all of us can make choices like this and say, I'm not going to use paper when it's not needed. I'm not going to use plastic at all in my life. I'm going to actually buy refills for my pen and not keep buying boxes of pens. No, it's very simple choices. But if we make those choices, I will participate responsibly by only looking at companies I want to invest in which believes in this. So remember, we are a citizen, we are a shareholder in companies, we are a consumer. It is we who decide the narrative of development. Let us not shift responsibility to somebody out there to change the world. You and I have to craft this new economic model. If we need to have a planet-friendly economy, we need to have planet-friendly citizens, planet-friendly human beings. We need to really carry the slogan of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, not just to embrace the 7.5 billion people in the world, but every living organism in this world. The small bacteria to the virus, everything is important. I know we have to fight disease. We can't simply say let them ruin us. But at some point, if we can be respectful of nature, if only we realize that bats are not food to be eaten, maybe the Wuhan virus wouldn't have been what it is today. Simple thing like shifting food lifestyles, going back into the kind of living that most of us had maybe 300, 400 years ago in lifestyle. Understanding that economy has to be built on creating human and social capital. So the only way to craft this economy in a practical way is to invest on building human and social capital. And human capital is investments on health and education. The struggle that a lot of countries have is actually now solved by COVID. Even the investment of 200,000 crores or more that India has made in this year's budget for healthcare is good news. We need similar investments on education. There are four major ills which come in the way of creating this economy. First is decreasing investments on health and education. Second is increasing levels of corruption. In every single activity of human existence, we have brought in corruption. Corruption and all its side effects of chronic capitalism, elitist capture of policy, everything that goes along with it. Third is we need to relook at the minimum wage itself. We look at minimum wage by defining skill and the amount of time in skill. Skill is a priceless commodity. Let us not categorize people by skills alone. Let us look at it by complemented by looking at roles being played, the importance of role, the value they bring to crafting the economy, and the benefits they need to receive. And that means the next point is we have to look at jobs with decent wages. We need to define minimum wage to sustain people and themselves. And if we can do all this, I believe crafting an economic model that can truly be people-friendly, it can be profit-friendly, it can be planet-friendly. And I bring in the fourth P. It is not just the triple bottom line. I believe the quadruple bottom line is what we need to look for. The fourth P is peace in this world. If you want to preserve peace, you have to reduce inequities. You have to solve the crises. And we have to really understand that I have as much to lose as much as I can gain by I becoming an active participant or staying an inactive spectator. The more active participant I am, the more I can contribute to the peace. The world is ridden with conflict, and the conflict can be resolved only when the internal conflict is resolved. When I can become a very active engager in the entire ecosystem with responsibility, with dignity, and with the narrative that I am a critical component of the change that I desire to see. So I'm going to stop here, and maybe I know I've exceeded a little bit of my time, and I try to be as quick as possible in the questions Simi would have for me or any of the participants. So thank you once again for this great opportunity to share some of my thoughts, Dr. Simi and others at IMPRI. And I look forward to sharing some more ideas based on your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. It was so wonderful listening to you. Actually, thank you for being a passionate advocate and really providing your sense of optimism, imparting your sense of optimism to all of us in the sense of providing a new narrative of new economic model that you have prescribed. This is actually what is needed. But of course, there are certain questions, there are certain concerns as to how we are really going to move forward towards the set of prescriptions that you have provided. So we have a few questions that have come up from the audience, and certainly these questions really reflect the amount of concern that all of us share with you and converge in our line of thinking. So you started with the story, and it was really impactful. Certain Even in the last Padma Shri awards, the latest Padma Shri awards that were presented, we saw a 105-year-old Amma who was from Coimbatore, who has been awarded the Padma Shri. And in fact, her indigenous ways of living, of pursuing agriculture, etc. In fact, she has trained a number of ICAR scientists, agricultural scientists. So what I believe is that the ripple effect of the negative circumstances, so for example, of the pandemic, it is far reaching and immense. And that of the positive, the planet friendly ways, is far less. For example, from the story that you have shared in the beginning, and also with this kind of organic farming that this Amma from Coimbatore practices, is far less. What are your perspectives on this? Are these only small incidences where we can draw inspiration, or how can such efforts have a greater audience and also practice? How can these be brought into practice? And secondly, so may I put
Sure, please
another
come on.
question? Yes. And then when you say you know about limiting the profit, or if the 10 billionaires, the richest people would distribute their profits, then we would not have poverty, etc. Certainly that is very true. And what is actually hindering them? Is it a psychology that they don't care about the widespread poverty in the world, or are they just blinded by it, or they choose to be blinded to these challenges? And how much profit is enough? How much uh, do how much is enough when we have to decide that this is the limit to our need? So for example, to buying a pair of jeans, or to our greed, that okay, this is where we need to stop. How do we actually practice such limits upon ourselves? And does this also mean that we would again move towards a welfare centric approach? Because if there is again a move towards a welfare centric approach, then we would have more of government coming in, and more of government means it is only the lower rung of the people of the society who would be needing such efforts from the government at the behest of the profit maximization model of the corporates. So if you could throw some light on these.
I'll try to quickly say, I don't think things are as, it's not as if the billionaires don't want to share wealth, especially under the limelight of photographs and newspapers and social media today. It's very difficult not to share wealth. At some point in time, it's absurd and even looks very sinful to be making that kind of money, and so they have to make it look much better. So philanthropy is coming back in a big way. But now they're looking for impactful investments. Let's also be reasonable and not be judgmental about the set of people. There's a growing community of impact investors who are looking at social impact and asking questions, which is very good. Let me just give you some figures out there to show how things are shifting. And that's a silver line I said. And I see a wonderful comment or a question from Vivek Negi in the audience, talking about will it actually, will governance of the commons, resources, wage generation, all of that will be going back towards the traditional systems? Can we embed that in modern governance mechanisms? Now, that's a very critical question. A lot of our policy inputs are based on that. How do you look at public good, right? How do you ensure private gains along with public good? How much, where do you define enough is enough? What is reasonable profit? What is reasonable distribution of wealth? What do we really need redistribution of wealth? I'm a strong believer that no subsidy should exist. It may sound very, contradictory to everything that I speak. I live with the poorest of the poor. The poor don't need your charity. Poor need their dignity to be protected, preserved, and they need a little ladder to start participating in an economy for which they don't have the skills. We have leapfrogged the economic model to such a level that it's only an urban-oriented, STEM-educated person can participate in this economy. We have to shift the narrative, means we have to invest on building the capacities. So what we have to look at human development is we go back to the definition of development itself. We have been defining development as airports, hospitals, schools, buildings, roads, and all that. I think development should be seen as a constant expansion of human capability. Development should be seen as growing the capabilities in the human and social spaces, where it's a constant growth of human and social capital, right? The network that you have. And today, you and I get to know each other. We become socially transactable network. We're part of the network today. And people have to participate and engage in those kind of networks. We have to make those investments in the physical, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual domains of people. And that is all the state needs to do. Put their money into this and not into running hotels and bakeries and all sorts of stuff. 2 days ago, the Minister of Tourism of Karnataka said the government is going to build 3-star hotels. I don't even think that's what he should be spending money on. He should be putting his his money into where he's going to start talking about, I'm going to make my schools world class. I'm going to make sure my hospitals, public hospitals, are not looked down upon, but looked up to. They become the benchmark to which private hospitals reach out to. These are the kind of believing leadership we need in political systems. So to me, the way I'm looking at it, the shift has started to happen. Close to all the civic enterprises, the municipal enterprises, the urban local bodies, which are all part of the service delivery mechanism of the state, can start seeing themselves as part of the for-benefit economy. They're all growing at 30% each year around the world. Look at the power that the government can have if it shifts the way it runs these bodies. Look at, in the US alone, close to 1 to 5% of the GDP today is coming from fourth sector economic models. The shift has happened. Today, you have the B Corps of the US. We have a lot of new models that are coming up. India has announced the setting up of the social stock exchange. India has announced some platform where social enterprises can actually look at being decent in their profit outlooks without losing primacy of social intent. So these models are picking up. If close to 5% of US GDP is going to be driven by this already, and if we can start creating a facilitatory ecosystem where the laws are changed, policies are strengthened, a simple thing like inheritance tax in India can go a long way in breaking this chain of this inherited billionaires becoming multi-billionaires again. Right? I'm not saying they should be taxed without any reasonable rationale behind it. Small things like that. As much as so many incentives can be made tax-free. Some of my tribal women set up a social enterprise abutting the forest. It took them 18 months to set it up. What kind of ease of doing business are we talking? Ease of doing business is measured in Noida, Mumbai, and Bangalore. Can you do a ease of business measurement for a rural Indian community and then ask yourself how long it takes? To get electricity connection took us 6 months. That is what the state should be doing. You just be a facilitator, you just be a promoter, you just start embedding these concepts in your policy making and incentivizing participation of such people in that economy. People will start jumping in. The 20 lakh crore economic stimulus model we gave, could we have made it conditional to the fact that you must be part of this model? If you want this money, you have to start subscribing to this. Small interventions like that. Some Latin American countries have done it. Panama brought in a new policy on this kind of fourth sector economic model as part of the stimulus. Small experiments are happening around the world. And I think all this will contribute. So to me, the way I see it is, this change is happening. It needs to happen fast. And that's why this kind of discussion, this kind of understanding and sharing thoughts, this kind of practical, somewhere we had also demonstrate practical models. We're trying to do it here and there. Now we need to aggregate it. We need to get the corporates to believe in this and start jumping in a big way. Once you do that, once you get the governments, and unfortunately in today's world, the corporates, once you get policy think tanks and NGOs to also understand this, I think the change will be faster. I am very hopeful. In the next 5 to 10 years, the tipping point is real. The real way of assessing for me, the barometer of testing was last year's World Economic Forum. They gave us the space to the fourth sector thinkers to come and present what is the fourth sector economic model. Even the fact that they recognize that we have a space to talk about our economic model in a world where only making money is what was celebrated is a good sign. So I think the shift is happening. It is not as, it's definitely not bleak in my opinion. And it's a process. Like we built the knowledge economy, we kept on talking about it. It was a process. It didn't happen overnight, right? Similarly, this kind of a soulful economy is going to take time, but we have to do it fast, and we will do it fast because the pressures of the ecology, pressures of inequity are not going to wait for us to define new models. They are going to force us to find those models.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your responses. We are having a number of questions. I would like to take a few. There's one by Manvi, who said that there even in Delhi we faced certain some hailstorms last year, and then she juxtaposes it with the 2021 environment budget. The allocation, but the allocation shows it is very less. So are we recognizing the problem yet not providing the adequate resources to combat global warming and climate change? And again, there's a question that nature is becoming expensive. Of course, that is. So, westernized thoughts in the Western world, we are seeing a lot of push towards organic products. And traditionally, most of those products are from, Indian indigenous culture. So are we basically trying to adopt old Indian culture to show off the Western and involving the organic farming and organic products? We can learn from our past, just as the Western people in the West are trying to do. And similarly, it is for yoga as well. Yoga classes are there all around the world, and it is quite in a hype. And the amount of money that you need to spend to get the membership of such classes. And on the other hand, if these common community yoga classes are organized by, say, for example, Baba Ramdev on television or etc., then it sort of becomes politicized. So if you could throw some light on that. And also recently we had a very eminent panel discussion on the Uttarakhand floods. So Manvi is mentioning that we haven't learned from the lessons posed by the Uttarakhand floods. In fact, there was an activist who had quoted "Dham to dam." That is the way we are moving, from pilgrimages to we are building dams in the name of development. Such developments are actually increasing the demand for tourism and thus paving the way for more environmental exploitation. And uh, so if you could uh, provide your analysis on should there be a limit on the use of public commons? Don't we tax the use of climate, or say more polluting the climate? Should these not activities not be taxed? So these are a group of questions, and maybe you can
It will be unfair for me to say I'm going to answer any of them because I have 4 minutes left. And I'm not even going to make a fool of myself by trying to attempt. These are very serious questions for all of us, not just for the panel discussion or for the talk today. These are questions where I believe the answer lies within each of us. It's very easy for us to always externalize the problem, make it so macro that I become insignificant in the solution. I think people with the problem must be the people with the solution. We have been participant to this problem. I need electricity in my house, so I don't care whether Uttarakhand builds a hydropower station, which is far beyond ecological sustenance. Right? I need electricity. There's no electricity. I lose myself. In the summer, if I don't have a AC on or my fan running, I feel, what the hell? I can't live here. What are the government doing? I need to travel around the world, flying around in airplanes. I need to start looking at cars. Do you know, most of us don't even understand the world's most polluting industry is not the airline industry, or it is not your cars. It is the clothing and fashion industry. 33 to 34% of the carbon footprint is because of the fashion industry. But that's completely in your hand and my hand. How many of us will not buy the second chudidar or the second shirt that we don't need, but we need to buy? Every festival we think has to be with a new set of clothes. Every birthday has to be celebrated with clothes. How many of us do that? So isn't the change just in us? Why talk about something big and say that is not working, this is not working? Can you and I decide to make it work? Today, let's make a promise. I will not buy a new pen, but I'll buy refills. How many of you have even bought refills in the last 3 years? Honest question. Simple thing. How many of us really want to carpool? How many of us can share a lot more things or use material to the extent that we only need and not just be there out there? How many of us keep buying the next laptop or the next cell phone? We all need things, but can we make it the extent which it's within? All of us need to have cars, all of us need to have clothes, but can we define consumption on a very personalized way? And each of us do it, the aggregate will add up. And the organic thing, my entire research has been India's growth story. And I will tell you, India was the largest growing economy not for 1 or 2 years. If you look at Angus Madison's work and his World Economic Report or the World Millennial Report, Economy of Nations, and the Millennial Report he brought out in 2000. He passed away now, a wonderful person. For sustained 1600 continuous years, India was the only economy, and India and China were the economies that kept growing, but India is the only economy that grew consistently. 17th century, something happened, we fell back. 2 civilizations, India and China, were the world's largest economic civilizations. But the best part was India never paid attention to growing the economy. India paid attention to growing people. It was not about making India, it was making India. It was about making Indians. We invested heavily. That you look at the 1600 years of our economic growth, that is when all the scientific discoveries happened, whether it is zero, the binary system, whether it is metallurgical advancement, knowledge of chemistry, physics, trigonometry, calculus, algebra. All these human attainments happened in the 1600 years. So did the attainments create the economy, or the economy created the time and space to do these attainments? Is an argument we can keep having. But if you break it down, our education systems, our social values, are the ways the community was empowered enough to participate in the entire process, our mechanisms of governance, all this led to an ecosystem where investments on human capital happened. A Krishna and a Sudama, a poor man and a rich princely king, could go to the same Gurukula and study together, paying nothing. That is equity. Now, these are stories, but let's learn the morals embedded in these stories, and we can get out powerful lessons. And that is where my theory of change has been crafted. Invest on building human and social capital, and they will have powerful economic consequences. Let us not worry about investing on economic capital. That is what the current model of development is. Shift the developmental narrative, shift the model, build the people who will be responsible. For Dr. Simi or Dr. Bala don't decide to change personally, and they will change only when our emotional and spiritual capital is grown. When we are evolved in that space, we will say, I don't want the next pen or the next clothing. We have to evolve ourselves. And for that, we have to make personalized investments on people. So building the human social capital narrative is a way forward for this world, is a way forward for a planet-friendly economy, is the only way a fourth sector economy can grow, thrive, and sustain. And that's the only way for the planet, for profits, for people, and for peace in this world. So with these words, I would like to thank you for inviting me to share thoughts. And it was wonderful. I know we have not answered some of the questions. They're brilliant. But I think these questions have to begin from themselves. Negu wants suggestive reading from me. I know it is sort of self-marketing, but I would say read my books. I present alternate methods of development. I, the citizen, I challenge the existing notions of development and say how I, as a small citizen, can actually bring about great change. In Voices from the Grassroots, I talk about indigenous tribal communities and actually voices from so-called poor people, so-called ordinary people, how they demonstrate extraordinary intelligence in crafting these planet-friendly economies. So both are based on real-life narratives from around the world and mostly from indigenous tribal communities. And if you really want to do this, let's learn from them. Let's treasure the wisdom that they bring to the table, promote it, disseminate it, live it, and then all this is going to happen. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Such a pleasure being with all of you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure having you, and your passionate appeal to everyone, to the people, to the communities, to the societies, to the nations, and to all around everybody in the planet to live in harmony with the ecosystem would definitely create ladders towards moving towards the fourth sector model and the new narrative that you are presenting. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you, and everybody in the audience. Thank you, Team IMPRI, India Water Portal, and most of all, Dr. Balasubramaniam. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.